Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we welcome back to the show Dan Moore. He's one of our favorite guests, and he's our first guest for 2026. He's a member of the Fraternity of Hidden Light who's been researching and working with the Hermetic Kabbalah for decades, but he's also a very deeply spiritual person, and today he's going to share his own personal thoughts about a recent loss, and therefore the topic is going to be overall about death. And I'm going to do the announcements today because Michael's having a little difficulty with his voice. So before we get started, I wanted to share a few things. We are both reading, Michael and I, at the fabulous Enchanted Cottage here in Bakersfield, California on a regular basis. I read on Saturdays and Michael on Sundays. They are only in-person readings at the cottage, though we continue to do remote readings through our home business. And then you can also still purchase, it's of course available, Tarot Alchemy, our first Kabbalistic tarot book on Amazon. You can purchase it, and you can also purchase it locally at the Enchanted Cottage. And a reminder that you can also listen to our show as a podcast available everywhere and free as always. And our website, sixthsensesociety.com, also has links to many of these announcements. So let's get started now because we're very excited to have a guest, though it's a bit of a sorrowful topic. And welcome back, Dan.
Thank you. In fact, Happy New Year to you and Michael and everyone else who's watching. It will be, I think, a very transformative year this year, particularly with the events of the last week.
I was going to say it's sadly a very timely topic without necessarily meaning because of the tragedies unfolding in Minnesota. And I also wanted to say we are so deeply sorry for your own personal loss of your wife and spiritual partner. For how many years were you together?
Well, we met in 1980 and we were married since 82. So it makes marriage, as far as that goes, 43 years.
Yeah, that's a very long time. So it's sort of brave of you to come on and talk about your personal relationship to your recent loss and how it's affecting you. So how would you like to begin?
Well, I would just like to say something that I had read and contemplated a while back is that in this kind of regular mundane society, it's kind of like uh, death is one of the last remaining uh, things that we don't want to talk about. It's verboten. And in some cases, they almost make it want to seem unseen. But the problem is, death is a part of life, and you have to be able to integrate it into yourself. Certainly, this was the case of all ancient societies and all tribalistic peoples. They realized that, and because it portended the end of an interaction like you and I are having, a real physical thing. If we were sitting together, we could hug each other and enjoy something together and have experiences together in a very physical way. Once the body's gone, that completely changes. And you have to realize what is valuable to you, the life lessons that this teaches you. I mean, after all, if you knew, like there's some people who have terminal diseases and whatnot, that you only had so long to live, you would try and squeeze as much uh, appreciation out of life that you could get being with your relatives and your children and other people, even, because that's what makes it unique. It's right here, right now. And the things that are important of it are the memories and the experiences that we uh, gather onto ourselves for our collective, shall we say, our soul evolution.
And yeah, you're talking about the very human aspect of losing the physical person that has either been briefly in your life or in your case, many, many decades. And that is a very important part of spirituality. And one of the things I appreciate about studying Tibetan Buddhism when I was young is the emphasis on not only looking at death, but when my grandmother was dying, they really, the teachings and also even my teacher, even though he's from afar, and another Buddhist student, they helped me to be present with her. How that was really important to just go see her every day and spend a lot of time. And even though it was extremely difficult at first, um, it actually was a great teaching and a benefit. And I was so thankful that there were people that encouraged being around death, that was very important, not only for her, but for me as well. And just the way the Buddhists view death as being, like you say, part of life, and that it's important that you realize you and all your loved ones will eventually die.
And this place, we are going to transcend it one way or another. We'll experience it from a level which does not rely on a physical form to have those experiences. And that's the thing that's important for me. I think that got confirmed, particularly when I did this course on Hermetic Kabbalah about a year ago now. And that is that the mysterious ghost Sephira, the 11th Sephira, although there's only supposedly 10, the Da'at, which means knowledge, is an experiential knowledge. And that is, if you get into asking the question, why life? That's why life. Because these experiences, while they are kind of relatively short lived in the physical manifestation, uh, in the subtle, unseen manifestation, they never cease. And in fact, they collect. And there is a way to access all of this stuff. You hear about the the book of life in the West, right? For who's inscribed in the book of life. In the East, they have these Akashic records, which means that there is a memory, a living, vital memory to all of existence. Uh, I would call it nature, but there is. And there is a way, as you develop, to be able to access that. In other words, it comes to this amazing conclusion that you can know about something, anything, without having to think about it. You can merely tap into the existing experience that is always out there.
So it's interesting in different spiritual traditions, the loss of a person in your life is handled differently. For instance, there is this idea in some religious views that, they go to heaven and you're meant to let them go, and that's that. And you're not supposed to hold them to the earth through your own grief or loss, or even just wanting to have them here in a friendly way. And then I was struck by Rudolf Steiner's view of death, and especially your family, is that he thinks it's perfectly, in fact, he encourages keeping a connection to the dead, that's part of the evolution of humanity. What is your own personal view and experience of uh, that as far as relating to the dead? Do you feel like you want to stay connected? Do you feel it's better to sort of let them go and sort of, you'll see them when you see them, in a sense, in another way or another form? So what is your own personal experience and views?
Well, in one sense, you have to let them go physically because they're not around anymore. But in another sense, because of this experience that you had with them, this memory, this love, feelings, and even transcendental, I can't talk today, experiences that you may have with someone or a group of someone's, that is always with you. And therefore, in a way, um, they can always be around you. There is not a holding on, stay with me, don't be alone. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is because you interact, and we actually interact with every living, breathing creature on the planet's surface and in the air and in the ocean, that we have this collection of experiences which, through the most amazing quality of creation, the fact that everything is one, quite literally, and that it exists simultaneously within you, which is the below, and around you, which is the above, as the Hermetic tablet says. This is the one thing. And because of that, you're never really alone, per se. Okay. And there's an interesting, and for an ancient culture, this is one thing that really impressed me. Um, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which actually means the coming forth by day. It's not about death. They don't talk about death. Neither do they really in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That has a different title altogether. But to go back to ancient Egypt, you went through this process of going into the hall of the double truth, the hall of Ma'at, where your heart is weighed against their symbol of righteousness, which was a all white um, peacock's uh, plume. So that lightness is balanced with where your heart is to be, and your heart can't be over righteous or it can't be under righteous. There has to be a balance and an integration. And then you're asked of these 42 beings, the assessors, they're called. They want to ask a negative confession. Uh, but the last one is the most important one, and it's the most interesting one. And it goes something like this: you're asked, is there anyone uh, who is glad that you were alive?
Wow.
That's thought. That's a real thought.
I love
But
that.
and this is from them from thousands and thousands of years ago. This is part of their culture. How fascinated they were with the afterlife, yet they still lived life. Nobody's going out committing suicide just to be in the afterlife. It was just a part of life.
Right. Well, even the earlier descriptions of Hades included other things besides death. So the
Mhm.
underworld used to be viewed in a sort of, like you said, a different way overall, as and also just part of our cycle of life and birth. One of the things that's interesting in this particular period, and I don't know, if I agree or not, or if you would either, but in the Thelemic view, we're now in the age of Horus, and in the age of Horus, we recognize that we don't really die. So they talk about how we go from, and it's based on our understanding of the sun, that we know the sun, doesn't just die and it's reborn like in the dying God period. And I'm not sure exactly when this age started. I think Aleister Crowley thought it's the early 1900s, but it's an interesting age. It's the age of the child, and it is true in terms of physics. We do realize that nothing really dies; it just changes form. And so, because of that, and also because of some of the other things that I've read by early occult writers like Alice Bailey, do you think our view, not view, but experience of death might actually really change over the next 100 years? That we might find more real peace right away from death if we can experience it from that point of view.
I think it will, and its subtleties. It won't be looked at. Oh, this is a terrible thing. Don't think about that. It's something to be avoided. You always want to look young and youthful, and there's the whole cosmetic fashion industry right there. But that is not life itself per se. And I think we will begin to transform these appearances and certain sets of value that want to look on the other side of life, which is death, and that implies decay and corruption and essentially becoming sewage, which smells and etc. And that's something that people want to kind of avoid in a way. Uh, but it's a part of life. And like you said, as far as the physical aspect, that form doesn't change, but there are even subtler aspects. Did you see? I'm trying to think where I saw it. I think it was one of the news outlets, but I saw it on YouTube anyway. That they have been able to detect this very subtle light that we produce while we're in the body, but that light disappears when we die.
Hmm. I think I've
We're
heard
no
that
longer
actually. Yeah, I've seen
we're,
something
we're
about
no
that.
longer we no longer have it, and there's some of the stuff as we get closer to getting a clearer idea of what consciousness truly is, and that it merely manifests through this elaborate transceiver. That's the way I look at it because of your central nervous system and other subtle aspects, because you don't just have a physiology. And I'm trying to repopularize this term. Some people use it, and you have a metaphysiology too.
Hmm. What do you mean by that?
That is what you would call your subtle vehicles, the
Ah,
golden dawn, your sensation, your auric egg, essentially.
well, and isn't that one of the things I noticed when my mother died? Um, and she died suddenly and unexpectedly because of a fire. So it was one of those really shocking events. Was that when I met other people, of course, I would meet other people who talked about their mothers who had died in different ways. And because there's this biological connection, usually with your mother, if you're born, it had a more like intense effect on me. And I wondered about that metaphysical connection with our mothers. When you come out of a person literally, that it's not that it's better or worse, but you really have another dimension to the pain that you might not have with someone else that you hadn't spent so much time in their body, growing as a child.
Yeah, there's a whole thing about that because obviously we have a lot more capacity than we ever utilize. And the more you utilize it, the more you begin to transcend this physical form. Okay. And we always have that. And that's why there are certain places that, although I realize this pain and discomfort and whatnot, because of doing this work and developing empathy and sympathy and being able to tune into things, if you will, there's certain places I just will not go. Like I have no interest in visiting Alcatraz, period. Or any of the, like Auschwitz, for example,
Mhm.
there's just too much going on there, and I am not at this stage in my development having the psychological transcendence to see the bigger picture
Mhm.
where this becomes a part of it. Because curiously enough, suffering actually in the long run improves life. I mean, with Napoleon going around, they used to take the wounded off the field. They put them on a cart, like, and roll them up to what was the surgeon at the time, and that cart was called, of course, the ambulance.
Mm.
And what do we have today?
Yeah.
There are these developments that are forced on us that we have to do to in order to survive and whatnot. Is an enlightened. This is a perfect example for what's happening sociologically. Is an enlightened democracy better, or is it these dictators of which we have endless examples in history, particularly in the last 120 years?
Well,
You
it's
know,
it's another aspect of death that I think is important to talk about is how people die impact us differently. And again, it's neither good or bad. It just is. And so these sudden violent deaths, they shock us in ways, even though it happens, millions of times when you think about it in history. And the other thing I've noticed personally, sometimes it's easier, not better, to connect to one shocking death than thousands at a time. It's like it's hard to believe. Like it's our ego has a hard time saying, "Wow, how do I relate to, this genocide that just happened?" But one person or maybe a family were able to somehow connect to that. And I think in the United States, because of the recent murders in Minnesota, many people have been able to relate and connect to the horror of that, like very deeply, actually.
yeah. We now have what has happened in other countries and third world countries, and even due to our own manipulations within the country, cowboy diplomacy, as it was called when the CIA was getting when it was starting and all of that kind of stuff. That comes home to roost. And now we can sit back and say, hey, we shouldn't really be doing this. We shouldn't have this. Because all it is in many different ways, it's just a polishing of the false ego, and If you want, because the ancients talked about simple ignorance, which means you just don't know. And then there's complex ignorance, which means you're ignorant of the fact that you are ignorant. And I'm sorry, but the leader of this country is a shining poster boy example of that. He just is. Whether you agree with me or not, I really don't care. This is my personal opinion. And it is based on seeing history. And this is why he wants to alter history. And this is why he doesn't want people to get that much of an education. You notice that, right? They're pushing out education and scientific research and stuff like this. But uh, it's going to all come crashing down eventually. And it's starting to. There are major cracks opening up, which I saw, a year ago or so or more.
So, getting back to when we have a personal loss that really impacts us, like you did, where you spent, a lot of your life with one person. So far, what has been your journey with handling it and dealing with it that you feel has helped you in some way?
Well, in dealing with it, I have to say the uh, precedence of my two parents before this gave me a lot of clues as to how things were going to change. I have never lived alone in my life, but now I do. And what am I meant to learn from that? What is the light trying to teach me to realize? So I do things a little bit differently. Then there is the thing about having to deal with all of officialdom and getting the estate put in order and so forth and so on, and deciding what I want to do. In fact, since I've got essentially a three-bedroom home here, uh, I'm saying, hey, if you want to come to town just to visit, we want to spend the night or whatnot, or there's some of the kids' friends. Kendra lives in town here,
Mm.
and need a place to stay. Hey, come and do this. I'm personally flying in a lady from Florida who is very much into this, but she was Jan's caretaker at the time that I met Jan. And they were kind of like emotional opposites. Laura was very much a bohemian kind of wild child. Jan was much more conservative, and they kind of really bonded in a way that they got something from each other.
Hmm.
And they're very, very good friends. And because of certain things that have happened, I'm able to say, hey, I'm just going to fly you out here. We haven't seen you in years. We did keep in touch over the phone and Jan through Facebook. I said, why don't you come out here and, because it was so important. She was one of the first people that confirmed to me that Jan had come to her in a dream after she'd passed.
Oh.
And that happened, I think it was on Christmas. And I was trying to call people in the family and others that really needed to know. And she was one of them. It was a couple of days later. Uh, she told me about this.
Hmm.
And I know she's made the rounds a few other places too. So
And have you had experiences yourself with Jan?
I have not, only in the sense that because my my sleeping schedule is being rearranged, and I decided, well, it'll figure itself out. Okay, so there are times when I'm up half the night and stuff like this, but as I'm kind of floating in and out of that state from being consciousness to being asleep, there is that intermediate little area, and I feel her presence strongest there.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, I think she's sitting right next to me where we would sit and we'd watch, the TV screen in the living
Hmm.
room and stuff like this. So I feel a presence. I haven't had what we would call a fuel communication and whatnot, but I have had that with other relatives as well. And I'm just waiting because about 2 months after my paternal aunt had passed, she really liked me when I was small. She used to carry me around. And she wasn't that much older. I think she had just turned to being a teenager at that time. This is the late 50s, okay? And I saw her about 2 months after that. I had a dream, and we were just sitting there, and she was she really looked good. She had nice hairdo, and she was actually into some of the thing where a lot of the ladies want to show their midriff. She was doing that, and we were laughing and talking and all of this. And I woke up from that dream, and I go, "She's passed on." So we were visiting. I know we were, you
Hmm.
know. And it took 2 months, so I don't know. I'm not going to put any kind of expectations on it or have any trepidation about it. It'll happen when it's ready to happen.
Well, that's fair. And the dream world is certainly one of the most common ways that our relatives and friends that have crossed over and died come back. There's so many stories about it, and some of the occult books on the astral plane. One of the things I found interesting in when my mother died, a wonderful woman named Julie, she recommended Rudolf Steiner's book Staying Connected. And what had happened to her was her mother had died when she was in her 20s, I think, of an illness. And so when I'd met her, she had developed this relationship with her mother over 20 years through the dream world. And it's the only person that I've ever met that had this evolved relationship with someone important. And you could really tell she was at peace with her mother's death, but the whole situation had evolved over the years. It was like the mother was growing, and it wasn't just a visitation. And I was very struck by that she had taken the time to develop this relationship that seemed to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you get the kind of slant that the Tibetan Book of the Dead comes from it, because the actual title is on gaining uh, on gaining enlightenment from hearing in the intermediate realm. Well, the intermediate realm is the place between birth and death. Okay, when you are not incarnated. So I'm saying even there, you can have spiritual enlightenment and growth and
Absolutely.
all that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's interesting, and it really informed my understanding of theurgy or magic, that there is this thing about a reciprocal or reciprocity that takes place between you and the rest of nature, and you're actually out there um, helping the spirits and these beings and whatnot to evolve.
And what is your view? You mentioned it a little bit by talking about places you wouldn't necessarily go to because of the horror. Um, Do you think there is a difference between ghosts that sort of are found in places like that and spirits that come to visit us in our dreams, like our, you know, people that may actually be more at peace with their life? What do you feel, or is it the same thing? And if so, why would some people want to haunt places? Again, according to your own understanding?
Yeah, the reason I said that I was not um, comfortable going there was a personal thing. It's just it was not comfortable. It was kind of like if you saw Natalie Wood's last movie, which was directed by Doug Trumbull, called Brainstorm.
Hmm.
There's a thing where they showed a little bit of hell, if you will, and it was just suffering and guts and blood and this kind of thing. In fact, they had cut it down to 7 seconds. It was a little bit longer,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's pain and suffering and all this other kind of stuff. So from that comes a catharsis or a realization that, hey, this being a human being and being pleasant and integrating and all of that, that's the way that we need to go. Because the word human literally means to be more than mankind, okay? To realize your deeper potential, and that is for compassion and for love and all of that kind of aspect. Because as you suffer in things, you are taught very upfront and personal in your face, this is not going to work. This is not the way to do things. This will not solve problems. It will only contribute to them.
It's true that suffering creates compassion, and that's also, what Buddhism teaches you about the noble truth is that life is suffering, and then they teach there's a way out of it. At the same time, from my point of view, it does seem like we could learn a little bit from our mistakes. And that it seems Michael and I have had long discussions about that we're not really getting any more conscious than we have been. We have more, ways to make life easier, which is really nice, but we're still doing really awful things to each other, and some of it on a larger scale, actually. So I wonder, is this the way it is? Will we ever get beyond that? The fact that maybe we don't have to have quite as much suffering to gain compassion that there will be, but are we making it worse by the lack of taking the time to really look at ourselves and our own responsibility to not, I guess, lay things on other people and taking, deciding that, okay, I maybe I suffered as a kid and I'm going to take responsibility for the wounds from that, even though maybe I didn't deserve it, but I'm not going to just lay it on people all the time.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that that's one of the greatest lessons you can learn, like the ambulance coming out of essential warfare and other more advanced forms of medical treatment and stuff like this. It's something where there comes a commonality between all of us as human beings and even other beings, because sentience of a being extends a long way, and being an alchemist, it even extends to minerals and metals and stuff like that for me. That this is the potential that we have and that we have to realize about that. I think that us being more mindful of stuff and not wanting to put it over the side, like, oh, look at, that suffering over there. It's just Ukraine, or it's just Africa, or whatnot. No, it's our fellow human beings, and we can do something about it. I mean, really physically, we can do something about it. In
Oh,
five
yeah.
days, what the whole world spends on armaments, ships and planes and tanks and blah, 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 could give one day, could give the entire world fresh drinking water.
And there are groups and people that do make a difference. And it just
Yes.
seems sometimes it's still a little not enough difference. But at the same time, the other, I think there's a balance. Taking this example of what happened in Minnesota, and these monks started before this, but they're the monks that are doing the peace walk across the country, and they have no merchandise. They almost had no views in the beginning, but they're part of a Theravadan group that started in Texas, and they believe in walking for peace. And so it's really caught on during this really difficult moment in history in the United States. And I think I watched them, and there is something incredibly powerful about the way they walk, even, and their story. And so I feel that sometimes we have to do everything at once to get it right. you know, People have political actions they're taking, but not everybody can do that. But also, I do think the kind of peacefulness that they are portraying at a time when there's so much unrest is very soothing. And to watch people, they line up and greet the monks. They bring them food and clothing, and of course they'll bring them flowers, and the monks give the flowers back because that's not what they're there. But there's something very touching about them, and I started following them on Instagram and things, and it's equally powerful to some of the other actions. It's this idea of working on ourselves and helping people at the same time, to me, seems to be important if we're going to affect change.
Yeah, that's interesting. It made me reflect on something. For the first American Pope ever in the Catholic Church, that fellow was a missionary in Peru, I think it was. But he was taught by them down there that if you really want to feel and touch things and get to certain people, you're going to have to go barefoot. In other words, it was a thing about walking.
Ah,
Okay. And that's an interesting idea because there's this whole idea that when you're on holy ground, you have to take your shoes off. And that is a practice of the second order, the adept grades that are on the tree, that when there's a meeting we are barefoot.
Well, that's a great topic for another show because
Yeah.
Michael walks a lot of times barefoot, and there's a lot to it. Actually, a lot of the Hindu priests do it as well, and there's actually physiological benefits as well, and that would be an interesting thing to even to have as a topic because there's
Yeah.
a lot to it. But the idea. So even though we seem to be a little off topic, we're really not because we're looking at death and life together and the dance of death and life, and that death is at this point at least inevitable, although I'm sure that some people want the fountain of youth and they're trying to freeze themselves for eternity, which is a whole
Freeze
nother.
my head and
It's like,
bring it back
oh,
to
you're
life.
even there,
Yeah, sure, that's gonna work.
is that really necessary if we reincarnate? But that is something I wanted to ask you your opinion about is, so when, let's say, Jan died and, my mother died, and yet 20 years later, I can have a visitation from the people that have passed. And yet, if I believe in reincarnation, are they not somewhere else having another aspect of their life? Or, like some people think in metaphysics, are all these lives really simultaneous anyway? And that's why I can still connect to my mother I knew, and my mother I knew can go off to another life. That really sort of, I like to think about what's going on there because like sometimes I'll have this, my grandmother who died many years ago will suddenly come back in a dream. And I think, well, my grandmother must be doing some other things at this point, I would hope. So,
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ideas about that, and I think uh, that there's not one that's true. They're kind of situation specific. So, in other words, uh, there is what you're talking about. I could kind of describe as a multiplex kind of theory, in that you're here and there and whatnot. It's what we think too about the archangels, right? They're communicating with people all over the globe and in their own language and whatnot. And they're doing this all the time. So why not? As an example.
mhm.
The other thing is there can be this is according to a book which I highly recommend called Initiation by Elizabeth H. And you read it as a novel, and all it's a big book, a thick book, even in paperback. And the first 200 pages are boring, but after you get past that, you can't put the thing down.
Huh.
Okay, because she recalls her life as a princess in ancient Egypt, and I mean the old kingdom. That's what she recalled from. And it's very interesting because it connects with some of the experiences that I have had with regards to Rosicrucianism and stuff like that. At any rate, there can be, depending upon what the person's work was and what they did, a very long period of time before they reincarnate. Like this one priest that she was talking about, she says it was going to be 10,000 years before he reincarnated again on the earth. Okay, because of the work that he did and what he has to do. I mean, it just doesn't stop here. It isn't a
Right.
cessation. There's all kinds of things going on all over the place. And Jan being as Dolores Ashcroft Nowitzki said of her, and she passed on the 8th, by the way.
Yeah, I heard she passed recently. Yeah.
Yeah, on the 8th, 21 days exactly after Jan,
Wow.
curiously. She said of Jan that she was an excellent seeress, that she could see and experience these things and whatnot. And I think for me at least, that's where there is, because there was times when we were together and we would do some internal stuff, and we felt that we had been together before, and that actually the polarities may have changed, that sometimes she was the male and I was the female
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship. See, it was very interesting kind of stuff because everybody's going to evolve and get to the next level, because let's face it, you can't beat eternity.
That's true.
Okay, you can't beat eternity. You will evolve and whatnot. It might take you a lot of times, and they say what's the average is about 800 before we actually get up to the point of being a bodhisattva. Right, the next step is the Buddha, and a lot of bodhisattvas say I can't take that step because look at my brothers and sisters and what they are doing to themselves. I have to stay here. I have to guide them. It's like the idea of the the hermit being up on the mountaintop, right, with his lantern of hidden knowledge. That's what we eventually become, is something like that.
I really, really relate to the whole bodhisattva concept. And it was one of the vows I took that was incredibly moving when I took it in my 20s. And there are actually 10 bhumis within the bodhisattva tradition, at least Tibetan Buddhism. There are 10 levels.
Oh, how Kabbalistic for me. Thank
Yes,
you.
exactly. I never really, yeah, I have to compare them. But the idea that you would withhold your enlightenment because you wanted other people to go before you. And one of the things I think, there's a lot of that kind of, and it's really a timely topic too, because both of the people that were killed in Minnesota, the moments that they died reflected unusually so that they were decently loving people. So when Renee Good saying, "Hey, I'm not angry at you," and she was very calm, and then with Alex trying to help this woman, "Are you okay?" I think that's one of the things that's extremely powerful about their death. Uh, that was sort of captured, and maybe that's happened before, but that was actually captured, and our state of mind, according to at least the Buddhist tradition, when we die helps us or hurts us in a sense that seems important and in a way, even though it was horrible the way they died, to me I feel like they would be okay because their own state of minds, they were actually thinking of someone else and their
Hmm.
well-being on some level. And so I don't know, that just sort of touched me in a way, and the Buddhist teachings around that, trying to find a way to be aware of others. If you have that practice, then at the moment of death, they didn't know they were going to die, but nevertheless they were in a state because they were like that in their life. They were, it sounds like from what they talk about, both of them very kind, generous, helpful people. And I think that's an aspect that to me really touched me about each of those
It's an
individuals.
important aspect because compassion literally means to suffer with. And in this Western Hermetic Kabbalistic Rosicrucian tradition, you can't get into being a real adept unless or until you accept the unreserved dedication to be of service to all of life and the light. And that is paramount.
And that's why you'll see people that aren't religious at all, I feel, that are highly evolved because
Mhm.
they're generous, they practice thinking of others people. They're not martyrs. I don't believe in martyrhood myself, but they really genuinely want to help people. And there's actually a book by China, I think it's China Galland, and basically she went around and met these women in different places in the world who didn't follow any particular religion except for kindness. And they all were just involved in their communities doing something compassionate. And it spoke to me. I said, well, that really in the end is all that matters. And if your tradition helps you to be that way, great. If not, please leave it. If you're getting meaner and more selfish, I think that, and I know my particular teacher, Kempo Rinpoche, always emphasized kindness and compassion. Every teaching, he spent a lot of time before he'd go into the Vajrayana teachings on kindness and compassion.
Yep. That's what makes you a human being. Okay. Uh, so uh, this is those people, even though they're not religious per se, that religion is just an organized way of doing that. It is meant to teach you how to observe how life works. And I mean, another thing, the religion thing about tying yourself to a spiritual idea, but that's the real thing. We gained religious behaviors when we begin to observe things. And as we observe things, we survived better in the physical world because then we could tell when the equinoxes happened. And that told us when the days would get long and warm or when they would shorten up and they become cold. What kind of an advantage does that give you to survive? If you're our ancestors 30,000 years ago or whatever. You see, so there is this connection where the sacred space actually forms the connection between the heavens and the earth because of that. And that's what made it special. But eventually, all this stuff becomes very, what I want to say, bureaucratic and dogmatized and so on and so forth. There's a lot of people who are very spiritual and, in a sense, very religious because of their dedication to others and to the ideal, which we might call an enlightened ideal, or to the light itself, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. And it's sad that unfortunately, when religion becomes sort of dogmatic, it really starts to limit our own experiences and our own um, way of connecting to such a, for instance, universal topic as death. So one of the things that I sort of even get sort of upset about with even metaphysical people is when they talk about, like, they know this for a fact about death, when it seems to me uh, theoretical no matter what. Even if I've had a near death experience, it is still different from actually fully dying. And maybe it gives us a sense of what happens, but that's also what happened to that one person. And
Right.
so that idea that I feel the mystery of death is part of life, uh, at least in the sense of while we're alive. Perhaps once we die, it isn't a mystery anymore. I don't know, because I can't say I remember anything about death personally. You know, I can only say my living experience of death. And even
Right.
that is so unique for everybody. I did want to mention that idea of the presence of somebody being extremely important when someone dies, and that you notice it and that you believe it. Because this happens to be my brother's birthday, who was lost at sea over 48 years ago. So it just happened to be on his birthday today. And I do remember when he first died, I felt like this, his huge presence in the sky sometimes in weird ways. And I was not particularly religious. I didn't even know how to, uh, what to believe in a sense. And especially because it seems so exaggerated. And I realized later that, you know, whatever, when you feel the presence of something, it is very genuine. You can't really make that happen. You can try, but I wanted to emphasize how that I want people to acknowledge it for themselves, that that is really a genuine experience of the person, like you had mentioned with Jan.
Yeah. Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I mean, it's usually about, you know, this 72-hour thing. Like Jesus is in the tomb for 3 days. It's 72. Um, that her presence was very strong the first 3 days. And maybe, you know, and it only began to really trail off towards the fourth day. And now it's kind of like, you know, we're having to take care of things, and things are changing here and there. And um, her presence is here, well, even physically, because we have some of her ashes. She wanted
Mm.
to be cremated. And it's a thing of evolving, and it's a thing of realizing what's going on. Yeah, it's sad because we can't interact physically anymore, but there are certainly some aspects of this kind of paranormal experience that invisible and unseen beings and forces can react with you physically, you know. And I've known some people personally that haven't. It wasn't anything mean, but there was a gal who was very clairvoyant that I worked with for a little bit, and it was easy for her to climb into my head and for me to feel her, which was very weird. It was like a Spock mind meld, you know. That's the only thing. You know, we thought together, and she lived in San Bernardino, and I was in Riverside, uh, but we could feel that kind of thing, and I knew when she was thinking about me. And there were other physical effects that would happen. For example, um, I lived with my parents, but I'd study in my bedroom, and I shut the door and lit a stick of incense, and it did a weird thing while she was concentrating on me. You know how it usually goes up and it kind of fills the room in a fog, right? A diffused fog. Well, this thing had stratified into this layer in about the middle of the room where it was really thick. It was clear above and it was clear below.
Hmm.
Okay.
That's
I
really
also
interesting.
saw one time in temple in FLO temple where someone had chanted the Shema, which is, you know, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," but in Hebrew. And we had a censer going like you'd see in the Catholic Church or Eastern Orthodox Church, and it was sitting on the altar, and the same kind of thing, but this time it kind of formed into a column, which just was a little bit beyond the base of that censer, which wasn't very big, and it had a column going straight up to the ceiling. Right after that had been chanted, it slowly coalesced and did that. I'm looking at that and I said, "Boy, that's fascinating."
That is really interesting. I know incense can do some weird things because I had that experience for a different reason, but I like that you're talking about um, the touch of someone who's crossed over that isn't scary because most people are aware of all of the ghost shows and people being scratched by, negative spirits. But you're right, the opposite is equally true and probably more prevalent to tell you the truth. I've had that experience too myself. Um, with my mother, the night after I found out she had died, I had this dream that had all this snow in it. And I felt like this love go through me that was so incredible. And I knew it was her because she really loved being a mother. Because I talked to my dad and she really loved all of us equally, even though we're not always great, all of us. And so I've never had that experience since. I've never had it before. It was such a unique experience. And I felt it was her coming literally through me, like her presence, and it was very, very soothing. And so I can't say it takes away the pain completely when you lose someone suddenly, but it definitely helped, and it stayed a very long time. I still think about it sometimes, like, wow, what was that, And I think maybe it'd be nice for people to talk more about those pleasant sensations and not just the scary ones where it's, the ghost scratched her and here's a picture of it. So.
That's why when you come in as a neophyte, the first lesson you're taught in my school is fear is failure. And these people have, scratch and they're afraid and whatnot. It's a manifestation of their fear. Be careful what you wish for
Hmm.
and the mood you present and whatnot, because the only thing that changes as far as magic goes to these great adepts who do things that are just, they seem beyond reason miraculous, is that it happens on a much lower degree of intensity for you and me. Okay. And that can sometimes it's greater and sometimes it's less. It just depends. But that is something that goes on, and it's a way that we interact, and it's a way for you to know that yes, there's something beyond this, and you don't have to. I used to think a long time ago before I got into mysticism per se and whatnot that no, well, when I die, I'll get all these answers about who or what is God and creation, all that kind of stuff. And I had that mindset. And but as I got into the occult and mystical and these traditions, when I discovered, hey, you don't have to die to get your answers.
I
You
think
don't have to die to get
yeah,
your answers.
that is true. And I think Rudolf Steiner especially would agree with that since he was really into building the interior spiritual world here now. And that's the real, I mean, some of the mystics say that is the real world anyway, is that the interior world. And if you think about it, even if you aren't, practicing spirituality, you're projecting your own thoughts and ideas onto the world all the time. So in that sense, you see what you're going to see. And I do think we do that. I mean, that we
Oh
uh,
yeah.
project that and that's how we view the world. And that's why some people's worldview will change radically because they have changed interiorly. They're different inside. So their view is different of the world.
Yeah. And that's the experience of it. That's why, in a sense, all the initiates were called twice born. And in modern Christianity, they just call it reborn.
Hmm.
I've been reborn. But that's the point, that you went through this catharsis of a death-like experience where some aspects of you are completely transcended. And that's your enlightenment. And that's where you see and you become compassionate, and all of that is through that kind of experience. And you have to come to terms with it because we see it all around. There are a very, very few human beings that transcend without experiencing death. And we have some accounts of that in the Old Testament, like with Enoch, who was actually Hanok. And that Hanok, by the way, it means initiate or initiated tradition. But Enoch was the only one who became Metatron. Okay. In other words, the initiated tradition will take you to that top grade, at the very top where Keter is, right? The one who knows the self most, and in Latin it's called ipsissimus.
Well, I
So
think that is an
there's that.
interesting. That's definitely another interesting topic I'm interested in. Is in and they call it in the Tibetan Buddhism the rainbow body, and
Yeah,
there are examples of people that have left their body uh, alive willingly doing these practices. And I remember I was reading one about this sort of. Oftentimes they're like hermits somewhere practicing, but there's this whole concept of the rainbow body, and that very few people can do it, though that is something to aspire to. And I just got kind of fascinated by like, wow, that you could actually leave willingly, and it's not easy unless maybe in 10,000 years we all can do it. Who knows? I don't know the evolution of the human versus the spiritual.
yeah.
What's going to happen there?
Well, they have some fascinating things there. There are people who accept this unreserved dedication such that, right, they put them up on a corner overlooking the village they were born, and they willingly go into this uh, removal process where they're put in a little tiny room that's actually built for them, like a cone shape with a window that they can be given certain things to eat, and the stuff that they eat very slowly replaces all of the natural flora in their body.
Mm,
So what happens is they do pass, but their form mummifies,
mm,
and they're considered a guardian for that place.
wow. That's
Okay, that's something. That's the unreserved dedication right there,
yeah.
and real world practice like that. Or here's another thing which is very interesting. This was on public broadcasting a long time ago. They called it a television history of Vietnam. And there was the thing you heard about Buddhist monks setting themselves on fire
Mm,
as a protest,
hmm.
you know. And they're the very first monk that ever did this was filmed and takes up the lotus position. They douse him with an accelerant, probably gasoline or something like that, set him on fire. He doesn't twitch, no showing of pain. Eventually, the body decays enough that his trunk, his thorax, fell between his knees. Okay. And so he all burnt except for his heart. And they tried two more times to set the heart on fire and it wouldn't burn.
Well,
You
I
know
would
my
not
belief.
recommend that to anybody personally, and I don't think
No, but,
so.
but
I
the
know
thing is,
it's a
the heart has now become a
the-
sacred relic
right.
in a Buddhist shrine in somewhere. I don't know if it's Vietnam or Cambodia or where. But that was very interesting. It became even more interesting to me when I picked up Manly Hall's book, Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries, and he talked about the flame that's within the heart of all creatures that have hearts.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
there's a lot of things about the physiology of our body that we are still learning about, and I do think that yogis and Buddhists know more than we do, and about the real power in these different parts of our body, and we'll learn that more and more. I think more and more information is kind of being shared between the East and West, and seeing that the human body is kind of a superpower. We haven't tapped into all of it.
Yeah,
So.
you have to realize you have all of this invisible metaphysical aspect with you, your metaphysiology as well,
So we
you
are
know.
coming to the end of our show. I think you're still
Ah,
offering classes. Is that correct?
well, if anybody's interested in the course that I put out on one major approach to the Western tradition is Hermetic Kabbalah, and that has to do also with those Rosicrucian grades that everybody talks about and so forth. But basically, the Kabbalah is seen as a way of integrating astrology, magic, alchemy, and tarot into a grand system of spiritual development.
And we have
So,
Dan's contact information on our
yeah,
website too. It's always there, so you can contact him. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Dan. It was great to see
it
you
was
again.
marvelous. Thank you so much. And the thing is, you know, it's what do they call it in some places I've read? The great leveler of mankind, and death is that. We all become equal in that.
That's true. I agree. And that's a good way to end. And thank you all for tuning in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.
Thank you, too.